What's up, Bears fans? Welcome back to the Willis Twin Towers podcast. Guys, you want to know what it's like to be a Bears fan? This show has been on for just over a year. We had our 1-year anniversary a couple weeks ago. We have now had shows featuring 2 different fired offensive coordinators in just over a year. And that's something. So before we get into that, guys, obviously that's going to be a big talking point tonight. We just want to give you a quick reminder, as always, to please like the video, subscribe to the channel. You can find us here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts from. We're at Barroom Network. You can also find all of us at X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I am at _Jeff Willis, and Tim is at Tim Willis 24. And our executive producer, Aldo, is obviously at Barroom Network. So before I switch it over to Tim, just real quick, guys, another quick reminder to please throw any of your comments and questions that you have in the chat so that by the end of the show, we can get to them for you guys and make you a big part of the show, as we always like to do. So let me swing it over to my co-host here, Tim, and get us started on this another abysmal, unfortunate ending for a coach.
Hey, guys. Yeah, it's happy Friday evening. Hope you all had a great work week. As always, like Jeff said, I'm Tim Willis. Guys, I started last week just by saying there was a lot to talk about, and it's not getting there. We're not losing it. We're not getting less information. That's the crazy thing. There's even more topics to discuss this week. And I'm just going to start, Jeff. Let's just go ahead and dive into the Waldron firing. So I have a couple things on my mind. First of all, I'd be remiss to say that Waldron didn't have his struggles, because he most certainly did. We saw a lot of horrid play calls at bad times, starting with the speed option, which we've talked about many times already now. The Doug Kramer handoff, which we've also talked about many times. Just seeming to never get anything going in the short and intermediate passing game. It seemed to be every route was some deep throw, or we just didn't have a lot. It didn't seem like there was a lot in the short field to help Caleb get into a rhythm. As ironically as it is, the short passing game seemed to be the screen game, which in Waldron's defense, I feel like his screen game was better than Getsy's. However, it wasn't much better because we just still not getting guys to block, which is insane to me, or not putting the right guys to block in situations. So there's definitely been issues. It's clearly been a problem. With that being said, in my opinion, this firing is the ultimate definition of a scapegoat firing, meaning somebody had to be fired. And obviously the weak link on the Bears right now is the offense. So who else to fire other than Waldron? I mean, it's got to go back to the guy who's in charge of the offense. But at the same time, who's in charge of this football team? Who's the one who's now been responsible for hiring 2 offensive coordinators in 2.5 seasons, mind you? Who is the one who has now fired 2 offensive coordinators that he himself hired, that he was given the option of when you have an extensive OC search in the offseason where you interview 9 different candidates and you brag on how extensive and thorough your search was and how ultimately you felt like Waldron was, by and large, the best decision of those 9 because of his ability to communicate and teach players. Yet we've heard that word communicate be the problem in the games as of right now. They're struggling to get communication between QB and coach, or OC and other offensive players. It's clearly been an issue. So, yes, Waldron has been an issue, but the problem lies with the head coach that's doing the hiring. And I should have asked Aldo if he could pull up the clip for this earlier today, but I had listened to Courtney Cronin on Waddle and Sylvie, and they're talking about this situation, and she makes an excellent point where she mentions that Flus's job hiring the OC, was, this is now the second one, but ultimately saying, was Waldron chosen because he's not a threat to Flus? I mean, realistically, you had all of these great coaches that you could have brought in as your OC. Were they too much of a threat to Matt Eberflus as the head coach? And so they went with the guy that they thought wasn't a threat, because all of these other guys certainly have a bigger personality and are more personable, which has been the big thing. Like I said, the communication, but going with that communication is how he has been interacting with players and how the players have been responding with him. It's obviously been an issue, and everybody is continuing to talk about how that's going on. Even the players are stepping up, and they've said things as far as guys aren't working hard enough at practice, and the communication's not good in the game. These are all things that the players have said. We need to be coached harder. Again, all things that they've said, and it all goes back to Shane Waldron. But could it be a possibility that maybe that is the truth, that they wanted to hire a guy that didn't threaten their head coach? I mean, it's clearly been an issue. So it's hard for me to say that it was the wrong decision, because I believe it probably was the right decision moving on from Shane Waldron. But at the same time, at what point are we going to give accountability where accountability is due here?
Listen, let me pause you for a second, because Aldo's had a couple of graphics on the screen here that kind of coincide with what you're talking about here. So let me break this one down for you first, and then I'll get to the other one. But 5 of the candidates that were interviewed in this process for Bears offensive coordinator went and got jobs elsewhere. The Commanders hired Cliff Kingsbury, which has been a big talking point amongst fans and otherwise throughout the last several weeks now. The Bucs hired Liam Cohen, who, if you guys aren't familiar, he was a coach. He was the offensive coordinator at the University of Kentucky last year. And he's got ties to Sean McVay as well. He worked under him in the past. I can't remember exactly where.
In LA.
And then also
the Rams.
Yeah, I believe it was with the Rams.
He was the OC. He was an OC there. I believe he was the OC, but he wasn't calling plays, so he went.
Nobody was under him.
But he started as the quarterback coach. Then he went to Kentucky to be the OC. Wasn't calling plays. Then he went back to LA with the Rams to be the OC with McVay. Then he went back to Kentucky and he became the play caller at Kentucky.
Right.
And so then
that's why he was at Kentucky in the first place, is because he's able to call plays there.
Correct.
But, he was one of the interviews from the Bears, obviously. Greg Gabriel talked about it on his show several times, if you guys are familiar with Gabriel Talks Football here on Barroom Network. But another one of the coordinators that was interviewed in this process, Falcons hired Zach Robinson. He's over there. They're playing pretty well with Darnell Mooney, mind you, by the way, who's had a pretty big year to this point with Kirk Cousins. The Saints hired Clint Kubiak, and he had a pretty good start to his tenure there. They've kind of fallen off a little bit. Their team in general hasn't played very well. And I'll be interested to see what happens with Kubiak next year, because Dennis Allen got fired there mid-season. And I would tend to doubt that the new coach is going to come in and retain a bunch of assistants. So we'll see what happens there. But then the Chargers also hired Greg Roman, who everybody knows has worked with Jim Harbaugh in the past. He loves to run the football, and they've obviously done that in LA. And, Justin Herbert's playing well. So all these guys have had success at some point this season. Kubiak probably having the least amount of the 5, and that's saying something. So, again, going back to the other graphic that was on the screen, though, I don't know if you can find that, Aldo, the one you had in the first place. Yeah, here we go. He was the only candidate that got 2 interviews with the Bears, and that was from Courtney Cronin on the ESPN report there. So, look, I tend to agree with Tim here. I mean, we're talking about a guy who clearly is having issues with evaluating the offensive coordinator he's bringing in, as far as who's going to have success or not. Now, if you guys are familiar, Eberflus has spoken many times in the past about how this particular Shanahan-style offense gives him problems. So he has in the past, the 2 guys he's hired both have ties to Kyle Shanahan and his system. And most of the candidates that they've interviewed in the past couple of years have all had ties to that system. All 5 of the guys you guys just saw that got hired by other teams all have ties to Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan or Shanahan, one or the other. So,
except for Kingsbury,
in any
right?
case-
Kingsbury didn't.
What? Who?
Except for Kingsbury, I don't think he did.
Kingsbury, I believe that's a good question. He's worked under one of the Shanahans, I believe. Yeah. But not the one that I'm wrong on is Greg Roman. He hasn't worked under the Shanahans, but I believe Kingsbury has actually. I could be wrong on that, but in any case, you're talking about a guy who maybe has a little bit of bias in the way he's evaluating offensive coordinators and what he expects to see them doing. I think what backfired for Waldron a little bit. Look, Tim just kind of talked about at length the issues that Waldron had, in as far as in game and production and whatnot. But I mean, at the end of the day, there was a video on Rich Eisen's show earlier that I was watching with Nate Tice. And if you guys aren't familiar, his son, a former coach, Mike Tice, he coached with the Bears at one point. And Nate Tice was talking about how Waldron's offense had a lot of the same stuff going on. So they would send out one formation, they knew one play was coming, or they would send out one personnel grouping and, this play was coming, or they would, do this, that, or the other. And you kind of knew it was coming. The tendencies were there, and he felt coaches were starting to pick up on it. Well, what's interesting about that though is there, these other Shanahan style coaches, they tend to do a lot more motion than he was doing. They dress things up a lot more. And so it's interesting to see a guy who comes from that, not doing those kinds of things, or at least making those kinds of adjustments, whether it be in game or week to week, to have more success with your offense, who's clearly not producing at the level you want it to. They had 3 weeks of success. And it's like, you can't just ride the coattails of that. You got to keep getting better, because they still had areas to improve on, clearly, which they haven't fixed. The offensive line was a problem. It has been a problem. They finally got Braxton and Darnell Wright are going to be back this week, which is good, but Tevin's out. Ryan Bates will be starting at guard. So we'll see what he's got now, how healthy he is. It'll be interesting to see how this team shifts their dynamic. So let me just go ahead and segue into this. I don't want to spend too much time beating a dead horse with Matt Eberflus, because I think, at this point, I was a pretty decent supporter of, and Aldo's got the graphic here of literally a dead horse being beaten on South Park. But in any case, I've told you guys before, there were certain points throughout the course of his tenure so far that I've been in support of him. And it takes a lot for me to turn away from a coach. I really have to see, because, we live in this knee-jerk reaction society, so everybody wants to live in the world of what is going on right this second. What have you done for me lately? And I can understand that to an extent, but I try to kind of see the bigger picture with this whole situation for a long time, where he's done good things for the team, where he's done bad things for the team. And, we've just gotten to the point now where it's like all this, there's a lot of stuff that's adding up that does not add up to winning football. They've lost a lot of games where they should have won the football game. They've lost winnable games. They've been blown out in games. And it's just to the point where, as much good as he's done with the defense, I really think that unless they have a complete turnaround and end up in the playoffs this year, which is starting to look bad, I don't expect Matt Eberflus to be back next year anyways. So let's move along into what I kind of think this new offense now with Thomas Brown might look like. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Thomas Brown has been the passing game coordinator with the Bears this year. He was the offensive coordinator for the Panthers last year with Bryce Young when he was a rookie. Obviously, they struggled. But one thing to keep in mind is when Frank Reich was the head coach before he got fired midseason, he was calling the plays. And then they switched over to Thomas Brown for a while. And then I believe Reich took the play calling duties back for a game or something. And then he got fired, and Brown got calling plays again. So I can't remember exactly how that worked out, but Brown was calling plays for roughly, in patches about half the season, if I'm not mistaken. And it wasn't, so it wasn't all him there. Now, granted, the reason I even bring this up in the first place is because I want to see how he shifts the dynamic of the Bears defense here. Or Bears offense, I should say, my mistake on that. But I want to see if they're going to start running the football more. That's the big thing. That's the thing I want to see first and foremost, because this guy's a former running back. So I want to see if he is going to do his best to try to establish the run game more. And I've got a graphic that Aldo and I were working on earlier. Well, he did the work on it. I just gave him the stats. But I want to read you guys off what DeAndre Swift has been doing since week 4, because I think this is important. He's got 496 yards on the ground at 4.77 yards a clip, which is pretty good, almost 5 yards a carry with 4 touchdowns. He's got 20 catches for 184 yards. He's averaging almost 100 total yards per game, which is pretty good, guys. I mean, why are we not getting this guy involved more, especially when we're struggling to throw the football? So the last few weeks, as you guys know, we've had some issues with pass protection. Caleb's had his struggles throwing the football, either overthrowing guys or missing on throws or holding on to the ball too long. So, I want to see if they're going to start running the football more, especially considering the fact that DeAndre Swift has played as well as he has over the last several games. And again, as I said before, Thomas Brown being a former running back, I would anticipate that they're going to make a real emphasis on running the football more, which is what I've been asking them to do for weeks now, as you guys know who watch this show. So I want to see.
Willis has been calling for that too. He's been saying for weeks now we need to run the ball more.
He has. But another thing I want to kind of see too is I want to
let me rephrase that real quick. Let me rephrase it. He's not saying we need to run the ball more, but he has said we need to get the run game going more or less.
Well, that's
we need to get,
in essence, same thing. So, and like I was just saying, I want to see him motioning more too. These other, as I said before in the show, these other coaches from this, Shanahan and McVay tree, they tend to use motion a lot more than the Bears have this year. So I want to see them getting their guys moving around formations more. I want to see them getting more creative with the plays that they're using within the formations. I don't want to see them as predictable as I told you guys before, Nate Tice was saying with Rich Eisen earlier. I want to see them doing more stuff as far as getting creative and doing, making it look like one thing, but doing something different. And what I'm kind of wondering is if maybe they'll take away a little bit of the rein back from Caleb as far as like what he's allowed to do at the line of scrimmage. I don't think they're going to tell him you can't make adjustments or anything like that. But I'm wondering if those situations where you guys are familiar with this, if you've been watching the games, Caleb, there will be called run plays where Caleb will have a tendency to see, it's usually DJ one-on-one on the outside where he's got the formation, on the other side, he's got most of his personnel to the other side of the field. So he'll have that one-on-one over there, and he has the option to throw that ball there, even though the call is a run. And several times now, Caleb has decided to go ahead and take that one-on-one, and it's hit and it's missed. It's had both good and bad plays out of that. But most recently, it hasn't been working out very well. What I'm wondering is if Brown is going to come in and say, "Look, Caleb, I know that that's been a choice in the past. Let's kind of pump the brakes on that for a while, and let's just run the run play that's called. And maybe down the road when we're starting to kind of click a little bit more, maybe then we can kind of start doing that more, because I really want to get this run game going. I want to establish this run game. I want to commit to this run game." So I'm starting to wonder if maybe things like that, not just that in particular in and of itself, but I'm thinking, other similar concepts to that, if there will be a similar thing going on with Caleb and Thomas, maybe kind of scaling back a little bit in order to commit more to the run. So that's just my thoughts on that, Tim. I mean, what are you thinking? What are you expecting to see out of Brown as he steps into this role?
The biggest change that I'm looking for is going to be how he interacts with the players. And we've already heard players come out talking about how he brings a different energy and immediately you saw in DJ Moore's press conference, totally different guy. I'm sorry, but just the way he was interacting in that press conference, I believe, what was it, Wednesday? Totally different DJ Moore than we've seen over the last, 4 or 5 weeks. I really think that DJ Moore absolutely hated Shane Waldron. I truly believe that. I think he hated the guy, maybe not personally, but he definitely hated the offense. It was the way he was running the offense, the way he was calling plays, the routes he was having him run, just the way everything was going, the play calling, everything. I think he really just did not like Shane Waldron in that aspect. And he didn't bring a lot of energy, clearly, is what it sounds like from the players. So I think the biggest thing that Thomas Brown is going to bring is that leadership and that presence, which is what these guys have all been talking about. And if you guys don't already know this, Thomas Brown was the associate or assistant head coach, however you want to call it, for the Rams when he was with Sean McVay. So Sean McVay holds this guy to a really high standard. And
that was only his second year in coaching, too. Only his second year in coaching with the team.
Yeah, and there's Sean McVay had a quote. I wish I don't know what the quote was exactly now. I heard it, but I don't have it memorized for you guys. But it was very, very high praise for Thomas Brown. And this was after he was done coaching with him. So they really liked the guy. Or excuse me, Sean McVay really liked the guy. So to me, we'll see how this goes. I can't imagine it can get a whole lot worse. So, but I do think that the things they're talking about with how he's going to bring energy and things like that, and the leadership to the room, that should theoretically improve morale and improve effort, hopefully. And some of the attitudes, clearly, like I said, it's totally different attitude out of DJ Moore. And it's just so, this is where I've been really struggling, Jeff. And you know, this is ultimately one of the reasons I also agree that the firing of Waldron was the right thing, because it's been so uncharacteristic of DJ Moore how he's been over really this entire season since training camp started. Like, it's just not him. Like, when have we ever seen a guy quit on the field? Nobody plays harder than DJ Moore. They just don't. The guy is a consummate pro. He doesn't throw a fit and cry and whine when the ball doesn't go his way. He's literally the ultimate teammate. And this is what we've seen. This is why his teammates have named him a captain. Like, he has been, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? He's the ultimate idol for everybody. I don't even say idol. But like I said, he's a consummate pro, you know? So that tells me a few, like, is it, obviously it's not just the players. There's obviously something going on. And so hopefully Thomas Brown is able to bring this out of these guys. And we really start seeing more of that success on the field. But ultimately, there's a lot of things that are wrong, and you can't just pinpoint it to just Shane Waldron. So at the end of the day, the offensive line has got to play better. Caleb Williams has got to process faster, getting from, you know, he can't hold on the ball as long as he has, because that's been the problem. And I shouldn't say process faster, because I don't think his processing has been slow. I think he's getting through his reads well. I think he just holds on to the ball too long, hoping for that big play to show up and happen, and it's just not getting there. Receivers are not running good routes. I mean, we've seen it. If you watch Tim Jenkins, you'll hear he's talking about, you know, on the scramble drill, DJ Moore's just like standing there, like he's not even trying to move to help his quarterback out. Now, again, some of that could be, you know, Waldron and the play calling and whatnot. But again, this is what I'm talking about. Like, when have we ever seen that kind of stuff from DJ Moore? It's just totally uncharacteristic. So, you know, again, it goes to a lot of places. It's not just Waldron. It's not just the quarterback. It's not just the O-line. It's not just the receivers, but collectively it has got to improve. And a thing we're not really talking about a whole lot is the penalties, especially on the offensive line. There's too many false starts and yada, 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 penalty wise. But I mean, come on, like, I'm sorry. I understand that these guys, you know, Flus in his press conference today said that it's the cadence that's been an issue. Okay, sure, fine, that's fair. Okay, the cadence, these guys need to learn the cadence, especially these guys that are coming in off the bench. Yeah, whatever, blah blah blah. These are professional football players. Like, I'm sorry, if you can't figure that stuff out, you don't need that stuff. Is, you know, the chemistry and working with guys around you, I totally get that. That's fine. Those things are going to take time to learn and get better at. But come on with the penalty thing. That's your excuses. They got to learn the cadence. These guys have been together since camp. Like, this should not be an issue anymore. As far as false starts and stupid penalties, these guys are professional football players. Like, there's no excuse for that. I'm sorry. Just say, hey, they got to be better there. That's all you got to say. You don't got to say, well, I think this is what the issue is. Look, I get it. The mistakes are going to happen. False starts are going to happen. There's going to be penalties. That's fine. But this team is like barely middle of the pack in penalties. We're not good in the penalty margin. We're just not. I mean, we want to talk about the turnover margin. The penalty margin has been terrible. Like, we're penalized a lot. So there's just a lot of things. I know that kind of got a little off subject, but with the conversation I was talking about, it kind of flowed. But I don't want to pinpoint one thing. I don't want to sit here and say that it's all on anybody. It's the whole thing. It's the whole kit and caboodle. Okay. So I hope Thomas Brown can be that spark that kind of brings things back together again and we start having some success. But again, as you all know, the rest of the schedule is brutal. It's absolutely brutal. And we have our biggest rival in Green Bay coming this week. And you can watch Green Bay play. When they play the Bears, they're absolutely amped up. They're coached up. Their coaches are excited about the game. They're not losing to Chicago. That's how they feel. That's how they coach it. That's how they play it. They look at us like we suck, like they have our number. And who's to say they're wrong because they haven't been. And I don't feel that same way out of Flus. I think he just treats it like another game. And I'm sorry, but Green Bay is not just another game. This is the biggest rivalry in the NFL. It's probably the biggest rivalry in all of sports. It's that big of a rivalry. So at some point, you got to start treating it that way. And, a lot of people would say, if it's not a great season, I don't care if they win a single game all year as long as they beat Green Bay. And I'm really in the same mindset. Like, if we don't win another game this year, I hope we at least beat Green Bay. We have to beat Green Bay. And we have to start getting into a rhythm of beating Green Bay where it's not a fluke that we won. Like, we can't go 1-15 or 2-12 against Green Bay. We got to start, at the very least, start getting it back to a 500 matchup. But come on, let's get back to a above 500 record against the Packers, like the Lovie Smith era. Okay, let's get back to that. That's what it's going to take to win the North. You want to take the North and never give it back? You got to take Green Bay first. And until you can take Green Bay, that taking the North ain't going to happen. So I know I kind of went on a tirade there, Jeff, and I got really random with some of this stuff, but we're going to replay Green Bay, and this is not a game to get right where we got to go out there and win a game. So I don't know. Hopefully some of this stuff can start working itself out. But wouldn't it be the most Bears thing for the Bears to come out there and put up 35 points and win the game? Would that not be the most Bears thing ever? I mean, come on. It's crazy. We've seen crazier things happen, though. What do you think, Jeff?
I mean, just the whole situation. I mean, look, you're right. If you're going to take the North, you got to beat the teams in the North. That's absolutely true. I mean, Green Bay is a part of that, obviously. But, Detroit's, I mean, they're one of the very best teams in all of football right now. So if you're going to take the North, you got to take Detroit. I mean, not only just that, but Minnesota ain't no slouch either. They've been playing some damn good football this year. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to hold and sustain the level of play that they had earlier this year, if they're going to continue on that trend. They've lost a few games, I believe, in the last several weeks now. So they started off, I think it was 6-0 or 7-0, and I think they've lost 3 of the last 4, if I remember correctly. So they're not looking quite as good as they have, but they're still they're no slouch. That's a tough football team in Minnesota. So the Bears, if they want to be a divisional contender, if they want to take the North, as Poles has talked about, they got to win these games. One thing that I've noticed a lot in this Flus era too that kind of bothers me is you hear a lot of people talking about how teams got to learn how to win. And I don't feel like anybody ever really breaks down and what exactly that means. It's and part of it is being in these situations, especially I've talked about many times, there's 4 games in this Eberflus era where they had the game in the bag and they found a way to blow it, one way or another. There was that game against Detroit last year where they were up by 2 scores with 4 minutes left and they found a way to lose. And the same thing with the Denver game last year. They were beating the hell out of them before the half, and then they fell apart. So there's been multiple games now with this, the Hail Mary game this year. It's just at the end of the game, I want to see a team that's got confidence and killer instinct in those moments, not teams that are okay, well, we think we got this. Let's hope that we get this. No, just go and take it. Go and take that game. Go and finish it off. I don't like when coaches, and Getsy did this a lot last year, where they would get conservative in their game planning after taking a lead. It's dude, no, you've been having success by being aggressive or by whatever it was that you were doing. Don't stop doing that now because you have a lead. Put your foot down on the throat and take it and end it. End this thing. put it out of reach, and the Bears have had a tendency in the past at the end of games to kind of fall apart. And that's what I mean. So I want to see them having that confidence at the end of games. And I don't know if that's a coaching thing. It's probably partly that, I would imagine. I mean, Flus is another one of those guys. It seems like he's almost a little too nice. And again, I don't know what he's like behind closed doors, but it's like, apparently the defensive players respect him. And it seems to me like most of the players on the team respect him. Even, Caleb in his press conference last week. Now, obviously you're not going to expect him to say, hell no, I don't respect my coach. But somebody asked him if he believed in Coach Eberflus. And he's like, do I believe in Coach Flus? He's like, of course I believe in Coach Flus, and he talked about it a little bit, but it's like, obviously he's not going to say, hell no, I don't believe in that guy, but like I said, he didn't kind of shy away from the question either. He told him, yeah, I believe in the guy. And I truly believe he does. I think a lot of the players do, but the problem is, again, it's like they get in these situations where they have a chance to win, or, even with the usage of the timeouts or the in-game decision-making, there's things where Flus is really falling short. And it's getting to be the point now, I don't think he's going to survive it. Unless, again, like I said earlier, they completely shifted at this point in the season and they go on a win streak here and make the playoffs, which, again, I mean, it would really take a miracle at this point for that to happen the way they've been playing. But, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what this new offense looks like with Thomas Brown, and maybe we'll get some more production out of it. Maybe we'll start faster with these drives. Maybe we'll be able to finish games off a little bit stronger. So I just, like I said, there's a lot of things that have happened throughout this Flus tenure where I tried to be patient with this. As I told you guys earlier, I tried to be patient with him and I tried to support him, and think about all the good things that he's done and not have a knee-jerk reaction to him. But there's so many things that have added up, especially in the recent weeks, where it's like I don't know how much more of it can be taken. I think it's just, unless things completely turn around, he's probably gone. I can't see a way he survives this. And King Booker World mentions that Flus lost his support after not taking responsibility for the 15 yards before the Hail Mary and then doubling down on that decision. That was strange to me too. I could never understand that either. It's like, I get if you're like, I get you not wanting to give certain information about different things going on, or whatever your decision-making process or how you do things. But it's like, how are you going to sit back and defend that? That makes
How
no
are you
sense
going to say it doesn't matter? How can you say that doesn't matter? Which were the exact words. It clearly mattered because they couldn't have gotten in Hail Mary range without it. It clearly mattered.
So I just don't. I don't understand. I think I think we talked about this a few weeks ago after that game. But my point at the time, and I believe if I remember what I said correctly, was just that maybe he's looking in that moment like he's so zoned into the fact that they failed on that Hail Mary, and he's so upset about that in his mind, that other play doesn't matter because they effed that one up. So it's like, I don't even want to think about that. I just want to think about the fact that we should have never effed up the Hail Mary in the first place. So who cares about that other play? But again, it mattered. It mattered in that game and in that scenario. If you don't pick those 15 yards up, that Hail Mary doesn't happen. So in retrospect, that's exactly what he's talking about, but he's not thinking about it that way. That's my speculation on that whole thing. But, I just, we got to see something different here. How many times have we had this conversation, guys? We started the show off with this. We have had this show has been on this channel now for just over a year, and we have seen 2 different coordinators fired already. 2 of them in a year span.
We have more offensive coordinators at this point than we do years of coaching here. This is the 3rd OC in 2.5 seasons. It's insane to me. How I gotta ask you this, Jeff. I know you're talking, but have we ever seen a scenario where a head coach has 3 offensive coordinators in his tenure of 3 seasons or less and has been kept? How many times have we seen that? I've never seen a coach who's gone through 3 OCs with a losing record. Huh?
It doesn't typically happen.
Never
at all. I think the only scenarios that would happen in are similar or situations that are similar to Flus's, where the team was obviously in a rebuild mode in year 1, where they gutted the roster. And so they probably weren't as harsh on him, after that first year as a normal coach would be in year 1 with a team that's got a better roster.
That's not an excuse anymore. It's
I don't
not.
think it's not a great excuse anyways, because, at the end of the day, sure, you can't put his record on him solely from that first year, I don't believe. But at the same time, it's like we saw some of the same coaching decisions that we're seeing now back in year one that was, causing issues for the team. So, and King Booker Roll says, if I ever hear clean that up, complimentary football, or I got to look at the tape again, it'll be too soon if I never hear it again. And we were just talking about this earlier before the show, like complimentary football. How many times have we heard that lately? I mean, that's like the only thing he says anymore, Eberflus. And it's just, I understand that he's trying to, got to look at the tape. I think he's trying to basically try to get more out of the offense in that sense when he says that, like, look, we got to play better in all three phases. We got to play complementary football. Well, yeah, we know that that's a formula for winning, but obviously the offense is struggling right now. So we got to get that fixed. And what people want to hear is, are you going to do anything to fix it? What are you going to do? Tangible stuff. Now, obviously, again, as I told you guys before, he's not always going to give you everything. He's not going to tell you exactly what you want to hear all the time, because that's, just part of what coaches do. But at the same time, it's like, he doesn't exactly give the best answers either. So I also think they've
really handicapped Caleb, because it's pretty evident that his head coach is a defensive guy, because they're so worried about him protecting the football that it really feels like Caleb has had to change his game in order to not turn the ball over. And he's not able to
speculation on that.
Yeah. I mean, he hasn't been able to play like himself. You don't see that same loose guy that's willing to go out there and just fire the ball. He's definitely tried to play more conservatively, and I think that's what's made the gear spin too fast in his head. I just think that they're really starting to hurt his development. This is the same thing they did with Justin. It's like, why would you try to take that away? I understand you don't want to turn the ball over, but if your defense is predicated on taking the ball away, you're able to allow. I mean, it's okay for your quarterback to give the ball away every once in a while. It's not rocket science. Let the guy go out there, because guess what? If he gets aggressive, you're going to score more touchdowns. And then your defense, they don't have to take the ball away as much, because as long as they can get stops, they don't need the turnovers. They just need to create the stops so they can punt back and we get the ball again. And your defense has shown that they're good at doing that. They're very good at doing that. So I'm just, this whole charade, it's like one thing after another. And it's the same things over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm sorry, but the Bears fan base has every right and reason to be pissed about how this ownership, let's just call it what it is. It starts at the top, what this ownership has put this fan base through. And, people have talked about it. Like I'm going to be frank. Like, I don't know the woman clearly, but Virginia McCaskey, just looking at her, she just looks like a smug, like, the woman's never had to work for anything in her life, because her family has literally owned the Bears the entirety of her life. And they just keep handing it down from family member to family member. And as great of an owner as George Halas was, he had his faults too, especially when it came to paying players and things like that. So it's just like a revolving door. It's constant. Like, it's the same thing every time. And it starts at the top. At some point, you have to start questioning yourselves and say, what do we got to do to get this thing turned around? But honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think they care. I really don't think ownership cares. I know they want to win, but they're not willing to change their values and what they believe in and the way they do things in order to do that. They're not ever going to bring in a head coach again like Mike Ditka, who he challenged. He was bigger than the Bears. That's the thing. He was bigger than the Bears. And they're never going to allow another coach to come in here and do the same thing. It's not going to happen. Like, the Bears are always first, and they're going to always come first. And until that happens, which I doubt it will, as long as this ownership is still alive and owning the team, it's just going to constantly be that way. So, they say that Ryan Poles has full autonomy of the roster and coaching hires, but I promise you, if he went in there and said, let's hire Jim Harbaugh, I'm not pining for Jim Harbaugh, and Jeff and I were I'll stick to the same thing I said before, and I feel the same way now. We neither one of us really liked Harbaugh as the hire anyway, but just for the sake of the argument, if Ryan Poles were to go into the office and say, I'm going to hire Jim Harbaugh, I promise you, they would say, absolutely not. You're not hiring Jim Harbaugh, because they don't want Jim Harbaugh. And I'm sure it's the same with any other coach like that. And I don't care if they could sit there and say that he's in charge of football decisions all they want. I promise you, it's not that cut and dry. They have a say-so, and they're going to point him in the direction and say, no, we don't want guys like that. We want guys like Matt Eberflus, who are just pawns in our chess game. So, I don't know, Jeff. I keep going on tangents tonight. I'm just it's very frustrating. And I'm just like,
well, you're like any other Bears fan. We keep saying the same shit over and over and over and over and over again. It's getting old, dude. It really is. And it's like, you want to see them turn it around. That's what we're all hopeful for. I mean, think back to the offseason and how excited we all were when Hard Knocks came out and the Bears were, 4-0 in a preseason. They looked like they were deep and, their starters were playing pretty well. And then, the season came along and it really, right off the bat, the offense they just didn't play very well against Tennessee. Now, mind you, they have a pretty good D line up there in Tennessee, but still, it's like right from the get-go, the team wasn't playing well when the season started. And this is 2 years in a row now with Eberflus from a team that, has expectations raised 2 years in a row now. They started out very flat. Last year in the Green Bay game to start the year off was awful. I mean, just terrible. They got wrecked in that game. Beat up on both sides of the line of scrimmage. So it's just, my issue with this whole thing is the same thing as you're saying and the same thing as everybody else. It's like, I'm just tired of seeing the same shit over and over again. Quit doing the same thing that you've been doing over the course of time because it's obviously not working. But it's like, Poles is the one who made this decision. He's the one who had the full reign to hire the guy he wanted. And this is who he wanted. So this is a bit of an indictment on Poles. I mean, you can't say it's not. The fact that he's continued to have faith in this guy and didn't see the signs that it was going to be this way. And again, like I told you guys earlier, like I just feel like there's some people out there who are going to try to be more patient. I try to be more patient with coaches. I mean, that's probably why I'm not running a team, but Poles is probably trying to be patient with this guy, and it just it's not working out. So I don't think.
Well, here's another point too, Jim. Here's another point with that too. What do Shane Waldron, Ryan Poles, and Matt Eberflus all have in common?
They share the same agent.
They all have the same agent. Like, at some point, when can we start looking at this and going, okay, well, I get these are your agent's guys, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the right guy for the job. Which it's starting to really look like I'm curious. I don't know if anybody can look this information up, but I'm curious of the 9 offensive coordinator interviewees they had, how many of them had Trace Armstrong as their agent? And I'm going to bet you there was only one that did, and I bet you it was Shane Waldron. So if you're deciding coaches based on the fact that they share an agent, that is BS. And something needs to be addressed with that and done about that. Because clearly it's not working out. And I know Trace Armstrong was a Bear. I get that. But that doesn't mean he knows how to, point coaches in the right direction of a team.
Well, at the end of the day, I would just hope that, that's more of a coincidence than it is like you're choosing to hire these people.
But the Bears don't bet on it. But the Bears do not bet on that being the case.
I'm trying to say, that's a problem if that's the case. That's exactly why everybody would be bitching, because that's just a terrible decision-making process.
But that would be the Bears being the Bears. That's what they do.
There is an old saying. You guys want to know the Bears in a nutshell? There is an old saying, and you are all familiar with it. It ain't about what you know. It's about who you know. And that's how it's always been with the Bears. They reach out to people that they're familiar with to help them make their decisions, like Bill Polian, and like several years ago when they hired Ryan Pace, they brought in Ernie Accorsi. It's like, come on, you guys, just have an idea for the game. You've been watching this team play for 100 freaking years now. Have you not learned enough about football to understand that there's just certain things that even just a general fan would understand that you simply do not get? That's what I don't understand. That's the part that's hard for me, is seeing this organization that's been run by the same people for decades, who should have been watching the games enough to understand just as well as an average fan would what the problems are that they have, because it's clear as day. So, I mean, it's just the whole thing is hard for me. I don't have a lot of hope in that regard. My hope is that Poles learns from his mistake at hiring Eberflus and goes in a different direction next year in the offseason to bring someone else in who can get the job done. And Aldo's got on the screen here some of Trace Armstrong's clients, are GM Ryan Poles, Coach Matt Eberflus, former offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, and as well as Luke Getsy. I almost forgot about that.
It's not a
Getsy
freaking coincidence. It's not a coincidence. It's not.
I mean, I'm sure he's putting in a good work for his clients. I mean, what guy who represents what agent wouldn't do that? You know what I mean? So it's just,
it doesn't mean they have to hire them.
But that's the thing, is that's all they know how to do, Tim, as I just was talking about. All they know how to do is listen to people that they trust. They're not capable of making their own decisions like that.
You think Ryan Poles isn't capable of making his own decisions?
I'm sorry?
You think Ryan Poles isn't capable of making his own decisions?
That's what I'm trying to say right now. What I'm hopeful of is that Poles learns from his mistakes, which he made some mistakes in the past. And what's one good thing about him that we've seen so far is the mistakes that he has made, for the most part, he's known when to chalk it up and say we're done here.
Well,
okay.
Let's also be fair, though.
Not all of them.
Let's also be fair, Jeff, though, because as we say that, is like I asked if he's capable of making his own decisions, he's clearly taking the word of Trace Armstrong, who is somebody he trusts. He also does the same thing with the guys in the office. Could he do this without Ian Cunningham in his ear? I'm not so sure. I mean, he was right there ready to move up for Roma Dunze in the draft. I mean, how many times has he even been open and honest that Ian Cunningham's had to reel him in, or maybe Koziel's had to reel him in? I mean, who knows at this point? Like, I love Ryan Poles. I'll be the first person to admit it. I love the job he's done here.
I don't think these guys are making his decisions for him.
I'm not saying they are.
For the most part,
I'm not saying they are.
He's gonna collaborate with his group.
Sure.
That's just what good GMs do. So I mean. But again, it's like I said, I mean, he's got to learn from this past experience with Eberflus here and make a decision on the next guy who comes in. Maybe you don't go in a typical route direction that this team has gone. Maybe there is a little bit of something to hiring a guy who's an offensive mind who can work with your quarterback. I mean, a lot of the best head coaches in the league do call plays for their teams. They just do. I mean, let's think about some of the best coaches in the league right now. Sean McVay calls plays. Matt Eberflus calls plays. Who else we got? Give me some other coaches, guys, that call plays.
Head coaches?
Yeah, and it could be offense or defense. I mean, there's several coaches that do this.
Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell is another good example of that. I was thinking of, for whatever reason, I couldn't get Dan Campbell out of my head, and I know he doesn't call plays, but I just could not get that image of him fucking standing on the sideline out of my head. I don't know why, but anyways. Yeah, I mean, you've got several coaches, both offensively and defensively, that call their plays for their teams. It's not a bad thing to do that necessarily. Yeah, it can take away a little bit. Eberflus does it right now. He's calling the plays for his defense. So I don't think that's a big deal to hire an offensive mind who's going to call plays for his offense. I don't think it's going to take away from his head coaching ability. It's just you got to get the right guy. You got to get the right damn guy. That's the biggest problem.
I do think it has for Eberflus, though. I think it has taken away from Eberflus in-game situations because he's clearly screwed up a lot in those situations, maybe because he's paying too much attention to his defensive game calling.
I mean, it's just to this point, it's almost becoming clear as day that he's just better suited as a defensive coordinator than a head coach. And I hate to say that about the guy, but it's just the way it is right now. He's a good play caller. I don't defensive leader, but I don't know if he can be a head coach. I just don't. I don't see it at this point now.
Nope.
So we got some questions. Let's go ahead and start getting to some of these because we're getting kind of low on time here. Here's a question from Hector Zambrano. Hector, are you related to Carlos Zambrano, former Cub, by the way? Not that I care because I hate the Cubs, but I'm just kind of curious. I'm teasing you, but he wants to know what's up with the rumors about interest in John Gruden. I haven't heard a ton of that.
Never going to happen.
One of those guys, well, I can't see the McCaskey saying
never going to happen. So guess what? Guess what he would be? He would be bigger than the Bears too. There's zero chance that's happening.
Yeah, he would. He's got a personality. He's a fiery dude, and he's had some success in some certain spots. But I mean,
Aldo, can you play the clip? Aldo, can you play the clip of Gruden? Bullshit.
So, I mean, this guy, we know he's a fiery dude, and he's had a tendency to get on the bad side of some of his bosses in the past too, though. So, I mean, I can see why the Bears would be hesitant in that regard. But again, it's like, that's just not a kind of guy they would go after. I like Gruden. I think his breakdowns are fantastic. I think the guy loves football, and I think that's, a big part of it.
He's a brilliant football mind.
Got he's got his downsides too. Let's not be too.
I can live with those downsides though, because he knows how to coach. I can live with that. He can be a good head coach.
He's had success. Like I said, he's a guy who has coached in the league before. And he's, there was a video clip. I can't remember who he was speaking with this week, where he was kind of talking about what he would do, or what the Bears are doing with Caleb Williams, and kind of what he would do differently in their scenario. And I can't remember exactly what all was said, but it was pretty good stuff. And he's, like I said before, he's a guy who knows football. He's gonna look at it from a traditionally football perspective. I mean, that can be good and bad, because how innovative can he be, in that instance?
Yeah, so, but he's not going to call the plays. Probably he's going to be a coach, which is what
I think he has called plays a lot in his past, though. I think he was calling plays when he was with the Raiders. So
yeah, he might have. I don't know.
I believe he did. So the second time, so I think that's something he would want to do. And again, it's like, is that what you want to do with your second-year quarterback who you have to have success with now? Is that the direction you want to go? I think they have to nail it. They got to get it right. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but yeah, they got to get that part right next offseason. And Gruden would be cool, but I just don't see that. Mostly because of the McCaskies.
Yep.
So next question was from J2K, and I saw this earlier, J2K. This is a really good question. He wants to know, he said he heard us talking about Waldron being a McVay guy, yet he runs a New England-style offense. So why did Flus hire a guy who doesn't run the McVay offense?
That's actually interesting, Jeff, because who was it that I was listening to? It might have been Nate Tice on Hogan Johns, was saying that it's funny because Waldron runs the least similar concept and scheme to McVay of any of the McVay proteges. So that's a really interesting point that you make there, J2K. And I tend to agree with you that that's not the name I think of so much when I think of Sean McVay. I think of the Kevin O'Connells. I think of the Thomas Browns. Don't really think of Shane Waldron so much. So it's a good point.
You know what I think about it, though, J2K, is I think he's looking at it from the perspective that Waldron, yes, he has worked in that tree, but he's also had other stops along the way that were different styles of offense. That's why he runs more of that New England style offense. He ran that style offense under Charlie Weiss. He was with Charlie Weiss at Notre Dame as a graduate assistant. You guys have heard me talking about that in the past if you're familiar with the show.
Well, didn't he work in New England too? Didn't he work under Belichick in New England as well?
He did work under Belichick in New England, but I'm not sure if it was under Charlie Weiss. I don't
know about that either, but it's the same thing.
But they run very similar. Yeah, they've run a very similar style of offense in New England over the course of Belichick's tenure there. But in any case, I think Flus was looking at this like, yes, this guy understands the Shanahan system, can run this system, but he's got other influences too. So he's not going to be molded into this one idea. He's going to have an open mind to go and doing different things. But the problem is he could never find a way to get into a rhythm with anything. He could never find a way to exploit matchups or to get his guys in the best positions, or to make the right play calls in difficult moments and in crunched moments, crunch time. He's doing stupid shit like speed option and handing it off to a center who's playing fullback. It's like those things are not conducive to winning. And it's like, some of these coaches think they're the smartest guys in the world, I feel like sometimes. And that's the kind of thing that looks like. And Vizo Joe mentions that Nate Tice told Rich Eisen that Waldron's offense was the same formation, same play, defenses knew what they were going to run. We were literally just talking about this, Vizo, before the show. I was talking to these guys how Nate Tice was saying in that same video you were just talking about, I watched it myself, that a lot of the things they were doing, there were tendencies that other teams were starting to pick up on because they were doing a lot of the same things. You'd see one formation, you knew this play was coming. You'd see this personnel formation or personnel grouping, this play was coming. If you saw, the guys lining up a certain way, you knew this was coming. They were apparently really starting to become they were really starting to show some real tendencies on film with what they were doing. It was getting to be pretty obvious what they were doing, apparently. So, that's another thing too, is it's like, if you're not going to be able to adapt and make adjustments, you can forget about it. And there were some games where they had some pretty good game plans, but for the most part, especially towards the end of the year, that predictability really bit them in the ass. And you really never saw him doing more. King Bookerworld mentioned earlier on the show he wants to see more slants. I wanted to see more slants too, and we saw very little of that early on. We saw some, and then he stopped doing it.
I went on a huge tangent last week about that. I've been saying it for weeks now that they need to do more of that. 100% agree.
And J2K mentions that Waldron's nothing like himself when he was in Seattle. He was a top 3 and 12 personnel for 2 years. Then he comes here and runs a spread offense. Makes no sense. I thought he liked tight ends. I see where you're coming from, J2K.
Yeah, because where's Gerald Everett been? They don't even use Gerald Everett.
They don't use him. He's on the field. They just don't use him, which makes no sense to me.
I know.
I don't know that you need to be using him as much anyways. They've got that. I kind of see the reasoning behind him wanting to play so much 11 personnel because you've got 3 pretty damn good receivers. But he never found a way to make it work with all 3 of them. That's the problem, is like they couldn't all, work in unison for a game where they all kind of got going. It's just been like one guy or the other each week, and that's if a guy gets going. So, and again, the use of 12 personnel, when they did use it, I don't feel like they used it effectively. So that's another problem too. It's like he's not running his offense the way he did in Seattle. And I don't understand. Again, I think it's him trying to overcompensate for what he thinks his personnel looked like here. I felt he never had a good idea of what he had in Chicago as far as his ability to utilize it properly. It never worked. I don't think he ever knew how to use the personnel properly here. So that was a problem. And Aldo says there was a report that Shane Waldron iced Cole Kmet out because he was mad that Kmet publicly criticized him.
I've not heard that. I've not heard that report yet.
I didn't hear that one myself either. But if that's the case, Kmet is one of the best leaders on this team, one of the hardest workers on this team, one of the most self-aware and team-aware people on this team. So if you're going to be if you want that guy on your bad side, you obviously have the wrong idea of what the fuck's going on. Pardon my language, but that's just all there is to it with that. So Vizo wants to know, why didn't Caleb and Thomas Brown have much discussion while Brown was the passing coordinator? It seems like Waldron might have held them back. There was some talk about this, if you guys aren't familiar with that. In the press conference, Caleb mentioned that he and Thomas Brown didn't exactly have a ton of conversation over the course of the season because of the role that Thomas Brown had in the offense as the pass game coordinator. Now, from what I understand, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know this for sure, but from what I understand, the passing game coordinator does not have a huge role as far as like being in front of the team during meetings and going over things with the team. I think it's more of like when the coaches meet, they go over like passing concepts and ways that they want to attack the other team and their defense as far as passing game coordinators are concerned. So I think it was more or less a partnership between Brown and Waldron that clearly wasn't working, which is probably why he didn't have as much conversation with Caleb. But I still think, in my opinion, that's a little odd that that's the case, if that's the case, because you would think you want the guy who is running your offense to know, like, hey, this is what I've been seeing from these teams defensively. This is how I think we should attack them. This is how we're having conversations with the coaches in the meeting rooms. So, and King Book World says that he thinks Brown was given advice that was completely ignored by Waldron. And that very well may be the case. I think it was weird that we've had several people coming out and say that Waldron didn't hold players accountable. And even Keenan Allen in his press conference really, really kind of turned some heads when he said that Waldron was too nice of a guy, and he didn't, like, from the start of camp and on, he just kind of lets things let guys get away with things that he never corrected, and it kind of spiraled out of control. So that's an awfully demeaning statement right there. That is a telling statement for a player on your team after a firing to come out and say that about why he thinks you got fired. He was willing to answer that question like that. That's telling to me. And so, look, I don't know if it was necessarily a fact that Waldron is a terrible coordinator, but he wasn't a good fit for the Bears. Didn't work out. And, let's just see what Brown does. But that's kind of what I thought about that situation. So I think this is the last question here. Cliff wants to know what happened to the Bears during the bye week. We still haven't heard the reason for them falling apart. And look, they
don't have one.
They definitely have. They've fallen apart. They have not played well. I said to you guys a couple weeks ago, after the Hail Mary experience, I don't think they've been able to move on from it. I think they're still deflated from that. And I think that's part of the reason why they canned Waldron now, is because they needed to do something different, make a change, because Eberflus knows that he's probably going to get fired anyways. He better do something, at least in my opinion. This was part of the
decision. I felt like he was saving his job.
He was trying to. Anyways. He's trying to make a half-assed attempt to save his job. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. Absolutely. but they needed a spark. And I think that's kind of what was going on with that. So just my 2 cents. So Jimith wants to know, is there anyone in the building from polls down you feel comfortable can develop Caleb Williams? Anyone in the building that can develop?
Maybe, I mean, we don't know if it's Thomas Brown or not. That would be the one that's a possibility. I got to be honest with you, Jeff. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in, oh my gosh, the quarterback coach. What is his name? Kerry Joseph. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in him. Haven't seen enough to really believe that he's probably the right guy. Matter of fact, the guy that was the quarterback coach probably could have been the quarterback coach with Waldron here and decided to go take another job. So that should have been kind of telling too. You know what we're not talking about too, Jeff, that's really interesting? What's the wide receivers coach that was in Seattle with Waldron?
The wide receivers coach?
Yeah, he was. That didn't want to come to the Bears.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name now.
Chose to go somewhere else. Didn't want to stay with Waldron.
I can't remember his name.
Maybe that was pretty telling too. That he wasn't willing to stay with Waldron and wanted to go somewhere else. That's an interesting point. But yeah, regardless, I don't know if I agree that there's anybody in the building now that we got to see how Thomas Brown does. We'll see. I can't say that he's not the guy. I would say that he's going to have a better relationship. I can tell you that.
Well, I'll just say real quick. I think Caleb's got the tools in and of himself and the mental makeup to develop as long as they don't completely hold him back, which is a bit of a concern at this point. So, they fired the coordinator to see what Brown does, but I feel like, Eberflus is on his way out too. So last question comes from our resident Lions troll, Don Burr. He wants to know, should the Bears give Edmonds or should Edmonds give his signing bonus back since he's overpaid?
Let me take this one, Jeff.
I vehemently disagree with you on that, Don, because I think Tremaine Edmonds is one of the most underrated players on this team.
I would say this, Jeff. I don't disagree with you. I think Tremaine Edmonds brings a ton of value. My issue with him is, in big moments especially, he's not a very good tackler. He is missing a lot of tackles in the open field. He has missed a lot of tackles this year. Go watch some tape. He has missed a ton of tackles.
His metrics look damn good.
He does a very good job of getting himself in position where he needs to be. As a matter of fact, he's one of the best in the NFL at doing that. But he has missed some tackles that he should be making, especially, or a lot of times somebody comes and cleans it up quickly, so it doesn't end up being a gashing play. But there have been a few. He's missed a few bad ones that he needed to make a tackle. Like, it's a one-on-one. You're the middle linebacker. You got to make – all I'm saying is Brian Urlacher wouldn't have missed those tackles. Brian Urlacher would make those 100 times.
I still think Tremaine's not Brian Urlacher, but I still think Tremaine Edmonds has played pretty
I don't want to be
well,
unfair.
Metrics would back that up. He looks good on film, in my opinion. I think he's been a really good move, and I think he's played well. I'm going to hold you guys for one more minute because King Booker World asked this question. I believe he asked it twice, so I want to make sure we get to it. He wants to know why Chris Morgan, the offensive line coach, still has a job. And, you have a valid argument there,
yes,
King, because he's for the growth that Braxton Jones showed after year one and some of the other younger players that they had. We haven't seen a ton of growth this year from those guys. Darnell Wright has looked good in moments, but I feel like I was really kind of hoping for him to take a huge step this year. I'm not sure he's fully taken yet. He's been inconsistent. So, and again, the run game hasn't been great either. The run game has been, it's been better lately with DeAndre Swift, but I don't know if it's good enough to where your offensive line coach and your run game coordinator deserves to keep his job with the way that they've been playing ball. So I agree with you. I'm not sure why he's still got a job, probably because they don't trust the assistant offensive line coach to do any better in his spot if they fire him. And it's not like they can just go and get a guy off the street. So
interesting thought.
My guess is they don't trust the guy below him.
No, I was going to say interesting thought too. Maybe this is part of the problem too. You married an offensive line coach with an offensive coordinator who had never worked together before. You didn't let him bring in his own offensive line coach. Maybe there was disconnect from the start here between the two of them, number one. And here was the other thing. You promoted him to run game coordinator without even ever working with Shane Waldron before. So that could be part of the problem too. Maybe that's why the run game hasn't been good. Maybe they just weren't a good marriage. But regardless, it's another Bears thing. This is something the Bears would do. So I don't know, man. But I agree with King Book World that like I think he should have been fired too. I think if you're going to bring in a new OC, you got to let him pick his offensive line coach. I mean, I'm not one to say that maybe that would have been his choice, but regardless, you can't, say for sure that that was his guy because you vowed you were keeping him before you even brought the OC in. You didn't even know who your OC
I'm sure Eberflus was in his ear telling him how much he liked the guy. Him and tight ends coach Jim Gray too, because they were both kept. So
absolutely,
I feel like that's probably, I'm sure he had some influence in that. But
sure,
in any case,
bullshit.
A disappointment. It's been bullshit to say the least. Yeah, it's been a disappointment. So I don't know. Hopefully, again, we talked about this earlier. Hopefully, they get this thing turned around. I want to see them beat the Packers for once. So let's manifest that, guys. Let's get a freaking dub this week and beat the Packers at home. Jordan Love has thrown 10 interceptions this year. Let's keep that going and get another 11th or 12th one this weekend. And let's have this offense turn around a little bit and play better ball. That's what I want to see. So before we get out of here, quick reminder, guys, as always, to please like the video, subscribe to the channel. You can find us at Barroom Network here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find us all on X or Twitter. That's at Barroom Network again on X. You can find me at _Jeff Willis. You can find Tim at Tim Willis24. And we had a great show tonight, guys. So we really appreciate you being here and providing your questions and your comments to help drive the show. We're here every Friday night on Barroom Network, as well as several other shows that are here on the channel you ought to check out. But until next week, guys, let's get that win against the Pack and bear down.
Got Bears.
The Willis Twin Towers podcast is a Barroom Network production. Jeff and Tim Willis are the co-hosts and co-producers. Aldo Gandia is executive producer. Music is licensed from Pond 5. Any copyrighted material used was done under the Fair Use Doctrine for commentary, criticism, and informative purposes. All of our programming is available in audio-only format by subscribing to the Barroom Network wherever you download podcasts. Videos are archived on YouTube.